right, so today we're going to go into part 9 of the Search for the Doctrine of Grace. This is part 9. I have no idea how many parts it's going to end up, but at least we are going to be through part 9 today. We're going to finish the book of Romans, and then we're going to get into 1 Corinthians. So we're going to begin in Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, and we're going to look in, beginning in verse 1. And the two verses here in chapter 12 that deal with the idea of grace are verses 3 and 6. 3 and 6. So beginning in verse 1, I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship. Now let's stop right there for a second. So now the context of everything coming forward in chapter 12 is the idea of being well-pleasing to Elohim. Isn't that what grace is all about? Being found in favor in His eyes, to be found approved of, to be found in good standing with, to be well-pleasing in His sight. Verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what is the good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim. Again, these are the things that lead to the merited favor of grace. He wants you to renew your mind. What does that mean? He says your mind is all messed up. Your mind is a worldly mind. It's a fleshly mind. It tends to want to conform to the world. He says, well, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So how do you do that? You get all that garbage out and put all good new stuff in. And how do you do that? You look and find out and seek and search for and prove what is that good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim, which I can say with confidence is that you believe in His Son and that you obey His commandments. That is well-pleasing in His sight. That you believe in the Messiah and that you have faith and trust in your obedience to commandments to bring you blessing and to bring you protection and to transform you literally from what you are into what He is. So in verse 3, he says, for I say through the favor which has been given to me, there's that word grace, or through the grace which has been given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he should think, but to think soberly, as Elohim has given to each a measure of belief. So now he's saying, look, through the favor which has been given to me. So what is he saying there? Well, either through the graciousness of Abba to give him insight, or he's saying through the approval that's been given to him. He says, for I say through the approval which has been given to me, to everyone who's among you, not to think. He says, based on the approval that's been given to me, I have authority to encourage you not to think too highly of yourselves, but to realize, in other words, don't elevate yourself over other people. That self-righteousness that has you push other people down to lift yourself up. He says, but look, but rather you should think of yourself soberly, as Elohim has given a measure of belief to each one. So he says, based on the approval I have, or the graciousness of Abba to give me a certain measure of belief, I have the opportunity and the authority to instruct you with these instructions. Verse 4, for as we have many members in one body, but all members do not have the same function, so we, the many, are one body in Messiah, and members each one of one another. Now having different gifts according to the favor which is given to us, let us use them accordingly. So now what he's saying here is that now we're talking about graciousness. Abba was very gracious to give you a gift. He was very gracious and generous to give you a gift. He says, now having different gifts according to the graciousness which was given to us, let us then accordingly, if prophecy, according to the proportion of belief. He's also saying the gifts that only come to those that are approved. So now he's saying also, now having different gifts according to the approval which was given to us. Because he's not going to give these gifts to those who are not approved. Hopefully that makes sense. So he says those that are in good standing with Abba, he's given gifts of things like prophecy, according to the portion of belief. If serving, in serving, or he who is teaching in teaching, or he who encourages in the encouragement, or he who is sharing in sincerity, he who is leading in diligence, and he who shows compassion joyously. So what he's simply saying is, if Abba has graciously given you a gift, a talent, within the body, and we all don't have the same gifts. We all have different gifts that we bring into the mix as part of the body. You know, the big toe is not the nose, and the ear is not the mouth, and the tongue is not the elbow. They all have different functions, but yet you need them all. He's saying, but do so according to your portion of belief, or do so according to serving, or do the diligence and the effort within your gifting. Notice that he's not encouraging you to go step outside into somebody else's gifting. You want to be frustrated? Try and walk outside of your gifting. You want to be living in ease and effortlessness? Walk in your gifting. If you have a gift to serve, then serving for you is effortless. If you have a gift to teach, then teaching for you is effortless. If you have a gift of of encouragement, then encouraging people is effortless. Some of you, encouraging takes a lot of effort because it's not your gift. You actually have to think consciously about going and encouraging somebody. And I don't mean that to be shameful, it just doesn't happen to be your gift. But maybe you have a very good gift of serving, so you go, and even though you're not an encourager, but you're good to go help people and serve them and meet their needs and stuff. The gifts are different, they're not better than each other. There's not a hierarchy of, well, this gift is here, and then that gift is here, in some sort of hierarchy. One is not above another. But walk within your gifting, and do it joyously. Verse 9, he says, let love be without hypocrisy, shrink from what is wicked, cling to what is good. Why? Because back in verse 1 he says, that's well-pleasing to Elohim. He says, seek after, prove what is the good and well-pleasing desire in verse 2. So now let's wrap it up to verse 9. It says, look, let love, which is what it's all about, be without hypocrisy. Shrink from what is wicked, cling to what is good. Why? Because what is good will get you approval, put you in good standing. It's the well-pleasing things of Elohim. So hopefully that's clear. Let's go to chapter 15. Romans chapter 15 and in verse 14. The verse here that we're going to focus on is verse 15, but we're going to start in verse 14. Romans 15 and verse 14. Now I myself am persuaded concerning you, my brothers, that you too are filled with goodness, complete in all knowledge, able also to admonish one another. But I have written more boldly to you in part as reminding you because of the favor given to me by Elohim, to be a servant of Yeshua Messiah to the Gentiles, with the priestly duty of bringing the good news of Elohim, so that the offering of the Gentiles becomes acceptable, set apart by the set-apart Spirit. So are we to believe then, when he says here in verse 15, because of the unmerited favor given to me by Elohim? Why would Elohim choose him to do this amazingly important task? Because he didn't merit it at all. But he did merit it. He had the knowledge, the training, the background to bring this very abundant information that's in the Tanakh to Gentiles who never heard of the Tanakh. He was absolutely one of the most powerful possible choices of the time that could have been picked to bring information to people that have no information about Hebrew, about the Torah. Here's a Torah scholar. So certainly he was qualified, and he merited this from that point of view. Now, he didn't merit it by going around killing the brethren. But he did merit it because Abba saw other things in him that he could use. And so in his graciousness, he picked Paul to do these things. He picked Shaul to do these things. He says, so in verse 14, he says, I am persuaded concerning you, my brothers, that you too are filled with goodness, complete in knowledge, able also to admonish one another. But I have written more boldly to you in part to remind you because of the graciousness that Abba gave to me, the favor he gave to me, so that you can also be reminded of what to do the good stuff. He says, I'm admonishing you, he says, to be filled with goodness, that you too are filled with goodness, because that brings approval. Does that make sense? He's saying, look, I need to stir that up and admonish you because that's what brings the approval. Let's continue now in chapter 16. Chapter 16. And in verse 17. There's two verses here we're going to hit, which is verse 20 and verse 24, but we're going to begin in verse 17. Now I call upon you, brothers, watch out for those who cause divisions and stumbling, contrary to the teaching which you learned, and turn away from them. For such ones do not serve our Master Yeshua Messiah, but their own stomach. And by smooth words and flattering speech they deceive the hearts of the innocent. Your obedience, indeed, is reported to all. Therefore, I rejoice concerning you. So why is he rejoicing? Because they're obedient. And they're not just looking for stumbling divisions and causing divisions and stumbling and tickling words and flattering and deceiving hearts. He says, your obedience indeed is reported to all. Therefore I rejoice concerning you. But I wish you to be wise indeed as to the good and simple toward the evil. Be wise as to the good. This goes back to what we talked about, seeking out what's well-pleasing in Elohim's eyes. He says in verse 20, and the Elohim of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. The favor of our Master Yeshua Messiah be with you. Amen. The favor. So after all of this he said here, the unmerited favor should be with you. Why? Because you didn't deserve it because you were listening to flattery speech and smooth words, or because you were meriting it because of obedience? He said, look, your obedience indeed is well known. It's reported to all. He says, and the Elohim of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. Why? Because you have been approved of our Master Yeshua. And the approval of our Master Yeshua shall be with you, because it's approval that gets you all of that good stuff. If you weren't approved of, he would let you wallow and suffer. That's what happened to Israel every time they came out of approval. Every time they stepped out from under the covering and were no longer in approval by paganism, idolatry, Sabbath breaking, whatever it was, doing basically what was right in their own eyes, they were receiving suffering, not favor. They were not receiving any mercy. Even in Hosea, Yahweh says, you will be called no longer my people and no longer having mercy. Lo ruchama, lo ami. That's not favor. That's not grace. He said, but at the same place I called you no longer my people, one day you will be called the children of the living Elohim. Why? Because you will be approved, because you will make teshuvah, you will repent, and you will start keeping things correctly. You will learn to obey. And when you learn to obey and submit and do things the way of the Almighty, you then get approval, and then you once again will be called the children of the living Elohim. Because that only gets pronounced upon those that are in covenant, not those that have broken covenant. You have to be in covenant, and that's where the approval comes from. So now in verse 20, he says, and the Elohim of peace shall crush Satan under your feet shortly. The favor or approval of our Master Yeshua Messiah be with you. Amen. Timothy, my fellow worker, and Lucius and Jason and Sosipater, my relatives, greet you. I, Tertius, who wrote this letter, greet you in Yahweh. Gaius, the host of all the assembly, and me greet you. Erastus, the treasurer of the city, greets you. And Quartus, a brother. Verse 24, the favor of our Master Yeshua Messiah be with you all. The approval of our Master Yeshua be with you. He's wishing and praying upon his prayer here in the letters to pray that the approval be with them. What is he saying? The unmerited favor of Messiah be with you because you don't deserve it and didn't earn anything, so I should pray these things for you? I pray approval for you. I pray for you to be in good standing. I pray his graciousness upon you. That makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? That completes Romans chapter 16, and actually that completes the book of Romans. So we're now ready to go into 1 Corinthians. That was an overall underwhelming response. Yay! Okay, we're going into 1 Corinthians now. We'll begin in chapter 1. In 1 Corinthians, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so references, beginning with verses 3 and 4, but we'll start in verse 1. Shaul, a called emissary of Yeshua Messiah by the desire of Elohim and brother Sustenance, to the assembly of Elohim which is at Corinth, to those who are set apart in Messiah Yeshua, called set apart ones, with all those calling on the name of Yeshua Messiah, our Master, in every place, theirs and ours. Favor to you and peace from Elohim our Father and the Master Yeshua Messiah. So he's saying, grace to you and peace from Elohim our Father. He's saying, approval to you. He's encouraging them. He says, approval be to you. He's praying that they would be approved and that the shalom and peace from Elohim the Father and the Master Yeshua would be upon them. Verse 4, I thank my Elohim always concerning you for the favor, the grace of Elohim, which was given to you by Messiah Yeshua. So what was the grace that was given to them? The approval. The approval. They were found to be in good standing, that in him you were enriched in all, in every word and all knowledge. This is why they were approved. He says, I thank my Elohim always concerning you for the approval of Elohim, which was given to you by Messiah Yeshua, that in him, Messiah Yeshua, who they received, you were enriched in all, in every word and all knowledge. See, that's what brought them approval. Approval through Yeshua. As the witness of Messiah was confirmed in you. So they had the witness of Messiah, and it was confirmed in them. What do you think that does in the eyes of Abba? It puts them in good standing. It puts those people in approval. He says, so that you are not lacking in any gift, eagerly waiting for the revolution of our Master Yeshua Messiah. Verse 8, who shall also confirm you to the end, unreprovable in the day of our Master Yeshua Messiah. Elohim is trustworthy, by whom you were called into the fellowship of his Son, Yeshua Messiah, our Master. So hopefully you can see, if you take the full context of those 9 verses, he's talking to people that he believes are in good standing with the Father. He's not talking to a bunch of people that are just randomly selected and didn't deserve anything, didn't earn anything, and haven't merited anything. He makes it really clear what they merited. They didn't lack anything. They sought after Yeshua. They witnessed Yeshua. There was a confirmation that they had that witness. What's the confirmation of the witness? The way you walk. Your submission and obedience because of your belief in Yeshua. And so that was confirmed by witnesses. Let's continue now in chapter 3. And we're going to read pretty much the whole chapter, all because of one verse in verse 10. But let's read this chapter because, again, sometimes we may need to read a whole chapter to make sure that we are absolutely getting the correct contextual understanding of the verse. And so in my opinion, this is a chapter read to understand one verse. And most of us have been to many places where the teachings have been done where all they'll read is one verse and jump to somewhere else. And so you have no idea if they got the context right. Sometimes, like we read 9 verses to understand 2 verses, now we're going to read 23 to understand 1. Chapter 3 and verse 1. And I, brothers, was not able to speak to you as to spiritual ones, but as to fleshly, as to babes in Messiah. I fed you with milk and not with solid food. For until now you were not able to receive it, and even now you are still not able. For you are still fleshly. For since there is envy and strife and divisions among you, are you not fleshly and walking according to man? So now let's understand the context of chapter 3. Now he's talking to some of the people in the group that were still walking in the flesh. They were still worldly in their thoughts. They were still doing things that was demonstrating that they weren't even eating of the milk or drinking of the milk of the Torah, of Messiah, of the truth, of the understanding. But how did he know that they were still fleshly? He says, because there's envy, there's strife, there's divisions. These are all evidences and confirmations of the fleshliness. Just like there was other things in chapter 1 that was confirmation of the belief. Like any group, Corinth had a mix. They had some that had confirmation in their walk that they were in belief, and others that were a mess. Others that were not walking it out. Verse 4, he says, for when one says, I am of Shaul, and another says, I am of Apollos, are you not fleshly? What then is Apollos, and what is Shaul? But servants through whom you believed, as the master assigned to each. So he's saying, look, does it really matter which one of us brought you to the truth? Are you following a man, or are you following Messiah? He says, I planted, Apollos watered, but Elohim is giving the growth. He says, so neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything at all, but Elohim who gives the increase. He says, stop focusing on who. Oh, well, we follow this guy. The body is like this right now. Oh, we follow this teacher, and we follow that teacher. And some of you are probably making a mistake in doing that with me. Don't do that with me. Hopefully I'm of use to you, but don't elevate me like they elevated Shaul and Apollos. We shouldn't be following a teacher. We should be being taught by a teacher and helped by a teacher, but the increase comes from Elohim. The teacher is simply a guide that points you to Elohim, that points you to understanding, that points you to truth. But if you get all wrapped up in an emotional following cultishly of a leader, which is what was going on here, cultishly there were some that were following Apollos. Cultishly there was some that were following Paul, Shaul. And he's saying, don't do that. He says, and he who plants and he who waters are one in verse 8. And each one shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. In other words, each of those people doing their part are going to receive their reward according to their works. But guess what? Somebody has the role of planting. Another person may have the role of watering. Another person has the role of encouragement. Whatever it is, they have different roles. You know, some of you, when a teaching comes out that you feel is useful, you're very quick to repost that on Facebook or on the internet because you have an evangelical calling. I know you may not think of yourself as an evangelist, but evangelist is just a fancy word for promoter. Okay, I know the church is elevated into some super duper high level of something or other, but it's not any of that. It's simply a role of promoter. So when I post a new teaching, there are certain people that have the promoter calling that immediately reshare the link. Some of you don't. Guess what? I'm not mad at you for not doing it. It's not your role. You have a different role. You see? But the promoters do their promoting role. It's instantaneous for them. They can't help themselves. That's what they do. So that's what he's saying here. The ones who water can't help themselves. They're the ones who water. The ones who plant can help themselves. They're the ones who plant. But don't elevate the waterer or the planter one above the other because they both are needed. They both are needed. So just like the evangelists are needed to promote things, the nurturers are needed to nurture things, the encouragers to encourage things, the supporters to support you, the servants to serve, the administrators to administer, the teachers to teach, whatever it is. But yet we've got this unfortunate tendency to put them in a hierarchy. Like when we talk about the fivefold ministry and all these other things, there's prophets and evangelists, and they're just roles in the body. There's no hierarchy there. Okay? A teacher isn't any higher than the administrator or a shepherd or the prophet, or the prophet's not higher than the teacher, and there's no hierarchy. There's function, and we'll do a teaching on that at some point. But just to make it simple, the apostle is the guy who showed up and planted the congregation and then left town. The evangelist got excited when the apostle showed up to plant the congregation, and he's the one who yelled out in the public square and said, hey, everybody, come over here. We're doing something exciting. You need to see this. You need to be a part of this. That's what the evangelist did. And then the shepherd got involved to then sit there and nurture and love the flock, and the teacher started teaching. You see, all of these things were necessary, but nobody's higher than the other. You need all of these pieces of the puzzle. Now, sometimes they exist in one person or two people, several of these gifts. Sometimes, by default, they have to because you don't have enough of the pieces there all in one place because you have such a small group. And so he's simply saying here, look, don't get wrapped up into this fleshly thing, this divisions and everything, because that's what people say. Oh, by the way, this looks the same way. Oh, I'm of the crescent. Oh, I'm of the conjunction. Oh, I'm of this one. Oh, I'm of that one. It doesn't have to be of a person. Why are we all fleshly and using that to cause division? You can have your position, but have your position and respect the other person also. Because guess what? The other person's working this out, working out their own salvation in fear and trembling just like you are, and they just happen to come to slightly different conclusions than you did. But they studied just like you did. They sought out the Father just like you did. They just didn't come to the same conclusion. Guess what? One of you may be right, one of you may be wrong, and then on a different issue it may be switched. The other one will be right and you'll be the one that's wrong. So how do you know? You don't know which one is which. We always do the exercise. We've all been wrong, right? We've all been wrong, right? We've all been wrong, correct? And we'll all be wrong again. And we've all been wrong about something we knew we were right and we were still wrong. And so we know that'll happen again. So how do you know that this thing you're fighting with your brother about isn't one of those things where you're going to turn out to be the one that's wrong? How do you know? You didn't see it coming last time. As a matter of fact, you were ready to lay down your house, your mortgage, and everything to bet on that. That there was no way you were wrong. And guess what? You were wrong. You were wrong. And so this is what he's saying. He says, look, it's the milk. It's just loving each other is the basic milk. Can we just love each other? And then build upon that after that? And he says, no, you guys are still fleshly. He says, verse 9, for we are fellow workers of Elohim. You are the field of Elohim, the building of Elohim. According to the favor of Elohim, which was given to me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another builds on it, but each one should look how he builds on it. So he's saying, according to the level of approval that Elohim has given me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation. So it's not just grace as an unmerited thing. I don't know how anybody else can interpret this thing. So according to the approval of Elohim, he's given me insight. He's blessed me with understanding. He's not going to do that to you if you're not approved. Why would he? Does it make any sense? I'm going to go take people that care nothing about me, are doing all kinds of dumb things I don't approve of, and I'm going to give them all kinds of wonderful gifts and insight. Because it's unmerited. Because it fosters this ridiculous idea about grace, the sloppy, weird grace thing that they have in Christianity. Doesn't make any sense. No, what makes sense is that I'm going to take this person who's making an effort, who is being approved in my sight because he's seeking that which is well, good, and pleasing in my sight, and I'm going to give that person insight and talents and gifts to go do something I want them to do. Doesn't that make a whole lot more sense? So Paul is saying, look, according to the approval of the favor that I found, which was given to me, in other words, that was accorded to him. Abba said, I approve of you, and because of that, I'm going to give you the wisdom you need to be a wise master builder so that you can lay the foundation correctly. Why would he give all of that to someone who's not keeping and doing? You can't lay a foundation if you're not doing it yourself. How can I lay a foundation in you if I'm walking contrary to what I'm even telling you? Does Abba like hypocrisy? It's probably the thing he likes almost the least of all things is hypocrisy. So now hopefully you get a better understanding of verse 10 as we're going into this. Now let's continue. For no one is able to lay any other foundation, in verse 11, except that which is laid, which is Yeshua Messiah. How can someone who's unmerited, who doesn't know anything, lay the foundation of Yeshua Messiah? You can't lay something that you're not approved for, that you haven't confirmed your belief in, which gets you approval. He says, if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and straw, each one's work shall be revealed, for the day shall show it up, because it is revealed by fire. And the fire shall prove the work of each one what sort it is. And if anyone's work remains, which he has built on, he shall receive approval, which brings you the reward. There isn't a human being that would give someone a reward if they didn't approve of them. Why would you give someone a reward? What, to encourage them in doing stuff you don't approve of? Okay, so I tell my child they can't do something, and they go out and they do the something, and now I come over and say, great job, son, here's a reward. What is that going to do? Encourage him to do more dumb stuff that I don't approve of. So when he says here, look, he says the fire is going to reveal what type of work it is, and then if the work remains after the fire, which was built on, he says, then he shall receive a reward. Because obviously if it passed through the fire, it was done right. It was built on a foundation that was solid. It passed the test of the proving of the fire, and so it receives approval and then receives reward. But Christianity wants you to believe that salvation and reward are one and the same. Salvation was made available to you free of charge. Whether you get to receive the reward of it has to do with whether you're in good standing and approval. I don't think anybody gets into the kingdom that he doesn't approve of. Why would any being in the universe, a human being certainly would never do such a thing, want to spend forever with somebody they didn't like and didn't approve of, who did stuff that they didn't approve of, who was not in good standing with you? I mean, if I asked you to make a list right now of all the people that are alive right now today, or whoever lived, that would be on your list of people that you would want to spend forever with, I don't think anybody's on that list that you don't like and that you don't approve of. There's just no way. You would never put somebody like that on your list. Why would you want to live forever with somebody you don't like and don't approve of? Well, Abba's not going to spend forever with anybody he doesn't like and doesn't approve of either. And by the way, his liking is not sort of a ambiguous, arbitrary thing. He loves everyone, but he likes those that obey. You're in good standing when you listen and obey. He loves that. He desires nothing else that you would trust him, because he knows if you obey, you'll be safe, you'll be blessed, and you'll be changed into what he is. Does that make sense? Is this kind of coalescing together? Continuing, he says, if anyone's work is burned, verse 15, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, but so as through fire. So now what he's saying is, look, if your work is burned, hopefully you realize, oops, what I did before was wrong. It didn't work. It didn't get approved of, and so I can still be saved if I learn the lessons of it and now build the foundation more correctly. How many of you have built a foundation before in a house before that just got burned up? All of us. And so yet we still shall be saved. He himself shall be saved, but so as through fire. In other words, you still have to go through the fire. Just because your stuff went through the fire and got burned up doesn't make you saved. You're going to have to start again and build all over again. This time, build it correctly. Build it on the solid foundation of Yeshua, Messiah, the living Word, the living Torah, and that will pass the fire. Verse 16 says, do you not know that you are the dwelling place of Elohim, and that the Spirit of Elohim dwells in you? If anyone destroys the dwelling place of Elohim, Elohim shall destroy him. For the dwelling place of Elohim is set apart, which you are. So are you building yourself the living dwelling place of Elohim the right way? What's the right way? Well, we did a teaching called Follow the Pattern Exactly. And that was based on Exodus 25:9. Exodus 25:9 says, Moses was instructed to build the tabernacle exactly according to the pattern that was shown to him on the mountain. He was told to follow that pattern exactly. So he was told to build a physical tabernacle exactly according to a pattern he was shown on the mountain. And now Paul is telling us, Shaul is telling us that we are the dwelling place. So doesn't it then, by analogy here, by midrashing this out, the connection, isn't it obvious that we need to build our tabernacle exactly according to the pattern given on the mountain? And what pattern was given on the mountain? The Torah. The instructions of Yahweh, the commandments. What did he say earlier on? He says, seek and look for that good and well-pleasing thing in the eyes of Yahweh. He says, verse 18, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become foolish so that he might become wise. See, we deceive ourselves. How do you deceive yourself? Well, when what you want and what he wants doesn't match, and you convince yourself that what you want is what he wants. I need to say that again. When what you want and what Abba wants doesn't match, and you then convince yourself that what you want is what Abba wants. That's deceiving yourself. You come to a realization, I want this. He doesn't approve of that. I'm now going to convince myself and lie. I'm going to rational lie to myself that it is okay with him. And people do this to me all the time. They'll say, well, I'm sure Yahweh, I'm sure God's okay with this. And my answer always is, you better be sure. Because if he's not, you're in trouble. I don't have to be okay with it. He has to be okay with it. Oh, I'm sure he's okay with it. All right, I'm glad you're sure. Be careful lest you're deceiving yourself. Verse 19, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness to Elohim, for it has been written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, Yahweh knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are worthless. So then let no one boast in men, for all belongs to you. Whether Shaul or Apollos or Kepha or the world or life or death, at the present or the future, all belongs to you. And you belong to Messiah, and Messiah belongs to Elohim. Now let me really be clear about this whole thing about the wise and let no one boast, etc. I had somebody say to me, maybe about 12 years ago, 14 years ago, when I was teaching about the idea that we don't go to heaven when we die. Now that may be news to some of you. We'll do a teaching on that soon. But anyway, their answer to me was, so you mean to say that you're right and all the quote-unquote wise men for the last 2,000 years have taught us wrong? And I said, yes. And then they said, wow, the ego and the pride that you must have. I said, no. Reading the scripture, the wise are made foolish. So I wasn't claiming to be wise. I was simply saying the wise were wrong. Because the scripture doesn't back up what the quote-unquote wise were saying. And so that was the idea that's going on here at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 3. The wisdom of the world is foolishness to Elohim. Guess what? There's a ton of that out there available to you. And it is foolishness. And by the way, it's not limited to Christianity. Go look at a Jewish calendar and see all the nice pagan names for the months. What genius thought that up? I mean, what brilliant, wise person thought Tammuz was a good name for a month on the Jewish calendar? I want to know where's the brilliance in that, or Nisan? Why are we taking pagan names and making the names of the months of our calendar? Oh, well, we were in Babylon for a while. All right, but you came out of Babylon. See, so the foolishness of the quote-unquote wise is not limited to any one group of people. He says here, the wise of the world, that's everybody, will be made to seem like they're foolish. And so let's be careful. Also, you add to this the idea where it says, be careful you think you stand lest you fall. And so be careful of the wisdom you may claim and think you have. Humility is quite important here. Let's continue now and go to chapter 15. So you see why we needed all 23 verses to understand verse 10? Because he's saying, according to the favor in verse 10 of chapter 3, he says, according to the favor or the approval that I have, I've been given the wisdom to teach you how to build the foundation. Chapter 15, 1 Corinthians 15, and we're going to read verse 1, leading all the way to verse 10, and verse 10 is the verse where the word grace appears. But we're going to try to get to verse 10 here, starting in verse 1. But, brothers, I make known to you the good news which I brought as good news to you, which you also did receive, and in which you stand, through which also you are being saved, if you hold fast that word I brought as good news to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. That is in everybody's Bible, isn't it, that verse? Did I read it wrong? So here is Shaul telling people that it's through which you are being saved. So they're not saved yet. They're being saved. It's a process. And only if, oh man, that word gets in everybody's way, that if. The Bible is all based on ifs. The covenants are all based on ifs. Christianity is all based on no ifs. It's just been given to you by grace. It's unmerited. It's this Christianese nonsense. There's no ifs. You have nothing to do. It's just it was already done for you. There's no ifs. The only if is you have to claim Him as your personal Savior. Of course, there's not a single verse that tells you to do such a thing. As a matter of fact, He's not your personal anything. You're His personal something. But he says here, if you hold fast that word which I brought you good news. So if you hold fast, then you are in the process of being saved. If you don't hold fast, then you're not. So forget about the once saved, always saved. Because these are people, he said, if you hold fast to something I gave you. So you must have received it at some point. So once they received it, according to Christianity, they're saved. But he says, no. He says, you're not. You're in the process of being saved only if you hold fast. Which, by the way, matches up perfectly with John 15 when he says, those who are in me, who do not stay in me, are going to be bundled up and thrown in the fire. He says, every branch in me. Sounds like a saved person to me. He says, who bears no fruit. They're going to prune those up, cut them up, dry them up, and throw them in the fire. Paul's saying the same thing right here. He's not contradicting it at all. He says, well, then you've believed in vain. Because why? Because then your belief is what James tells you. He says, if you believe and your actions don't match, then you really don't believe. He says, I'm going to show you my belief by my works. And Paul's saying the same thing right here. He says, look, if your works don't match what you claim to believe, well, then your belief is in vain. Then your belief is in vain. He says, for I delivered to you at the first that which I also received, that Messiah died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that He was buried, and that He was raised the third day according to the Scriptures, and that He was seen by Kepha, then by the 12. After that He was seen by over 500 brothers at one time, of whom the greater part remain till now, but some have fallen asleep. By the way, that's the way He refers to people that died. They don't run off to heaven. He says they're asleep. After that, He was seen by Yaakov, then by all the emissaries, and last of all, He was seen by me also, as if to one born prematurely. For I am the least of the emissaries, who am not worthy to be called an emissary, because I persecuted the assembly of Elohim. So listen to what he's saying here. By the way, I had somebody argue with me on Facebook that when I made this point, and he's right, but he's wrong. I said that Paul doesn't get a capital A for apostle. He gets a small a apostle. So the person made a correct point and said there are no capital letters in the Greek. I agree. It's a metaphor. Okay, there's only 12 main apostles that are on a whole different level, emissaries, and Paul isn't one of the 12. And Paul himself says, look, I am the least of the emissaries. By the way, the emissaries also numbered all the way to 120. They were sent out ones. But there's only 12 of those 120 that got the big, they get to stand on the throne, they get to sit on the thrones and judge the 12 tribes. There's only 12 that get that position. He says, I'm the least of the apostles, the emissaries, who am not even worthy to be called an apostle, he says. Yet in Christianity, he's the apostle. Well, Paul himself says, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle. Why? Because I persecuted the assembly. But by the favor of Elohim, I am what I am. And his favor toward me was not in vain, but I labored much more than they all, yet not I, but the favor of Elohim was with me. So what is he saying here? That Elohim in his graciousness approved of me knowing that I would earn it, that I would merit it because I would work harder than everybody. He says, but the approval of Elohim, he says, but by the approval of Elohim, I am what I am. That Elohim in his goodness, in his graciousness toward me, his favor toward me was not in vain. I labored much more. In other words, Abba knew what I would do. So he approved, he says, Shaul, I've approved you for a job. I've selected you for a job. You need to stop persecuting me. Remember when he was struck down and blinded by Messiah, he says, Paul, Shaul, why are you persecuting me? I've got a job for you that you're approved for, that you're qualified for, that you actually merit by your skills and talents. You're just running off in the wrong direction right now, running around shooting at everybody. He says, stop shooting at everybody and let me target you correctly where you need to be. Again, that's not an unmerited thing. Now, he hadn't earned it by persecuting everybody. Abba knew what he would do. He had the qualifications that he had worked his whole life to be ready for. So he says, by the favor, the grace of Elohim, I am what I am, and by his grace toward me was not his grace towards me was not in vain, but I labored much more than they all. In other words, I showed him that his approval was worth it, that I did merit his approval. Yet not I, but the favor, approval of Elohim is with me. The graciousness. In other words, he said, it's still not me. If Abba never approved of me, I'd still be running around killing people, and eventually they'd have had to destroy me. So it's still not me. Abba gave me these talents. Abba gave me these gifts. Just like he talked about in other places about these gifts and talents of teaching and administration and serving and encouragement, whatever it is. He says, but look, it's not of me. Abba gave me these things, and I walked in it. I labored much more than they all. Verse 11, whether then it was I or they, see, so we could proclaim, and so you believed. He's saying, look, it doesn't matter who it was. We proclaimed it, and you believed, and that's what's important. And if Messiah is proclaimed that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? And so then he goes on and on and on from there. Okay, so we really were just going to verse 10. But you understand, as he lays this all out, he explains how this is all played out. He was in approval, so he was given an instruction and he was given a job to do. Jeremiah was approved from when? From his mother's womb, it says. He says, I called you, I knew you from your mother's womb. Had he done anything yet? No, but because time doesn't matter to Abba, the end and the beginning are all happening at the same time, he already knows of whom he approves. And he approved to Jeremiah. Jeremiah hadn't done anything yet. He approved to Shaul because he knew what Shaul was going to do. Does that make any sense? Again, we're not dealing with this idea of grace as a doctrine. Continuing in the same chapter, we're still in chapter 15, and go to verse 50. And verse 57 is where the verse appears. We're going to start in verse 50, and we'll read to verse 58. We'll read to the rest of the chapter. And this I say, brothers, that flesh and blood is unable to inherit the reign of Elohim, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. So what is he saying there? He says, you can't be approved of if you're doing things that are not approved of. You're not going to be approved of to enter the kingdom if you're doing stuff that's unapproved, which is corruption. Corruptible things are not going to end up in the incorruption. See, I speak a secret to you. We shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed. So he's certainly not saying we shall not all be in heaven standing and waiting to come down here or whatever. He says we're not going to all be asleep, but we all shall be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the sound of the last trump, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortal to put on immortality. And when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written, death is swallowed up in overcoming. In overcoming! Does Christianity tell you have to overcome anything? No, make an altar call, make a confession, and you're all good. He says, "O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your overcoming? And the sting of death is the sin, and the power of the sin is the Torah." Let's make sure we understand that verse. The sting of death is the sin. The sin causes the death that you are stung by. And the power of the sin is revealed to you in the Torah. The Torah reveals to you the power that sin has to cause you death, to cause you suffering, to bring upon you cursing. It's not that the Torah is where it gives the sin power. The Torah shows you the power sin has over you. The Torah shows you and demonstrates to you what the end of all of that is. Without the Torah, you wouldn't know what sin is, Paul teaches us, and that's correct. He says, now we get to verse 57. He says, "But thanks or grace to Elohim, who gives us the overcoming through our Master Yeshua Messiah." But approval to Elohim. In other words, we are, in a sense, approve of Elohim in doing things this way. We should be in approval as well. Not that he needs our approval, but we should agree that his way is the right way. We should be saying, yes, we approve of the idea that corruptible should not be receiving incorruptible. That those that are in sin should not be receiving the kingdom. That those that are in abject rebellion should not be receiving the kingdom. Who wants to, look, if everybody like that gets in, I don't want to be there. And I don't know why you would either. I mean, if every person that made an altar call and then goes on doing whatever they want and just doesn't keep anything or obey anything gets to be in there, that sounds like hell, not heaven. So why would you want to be there? It doesn't make any sense. He says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the works," or the work of the master, "knowing that your labor is not in vain in the master." What labor is he talking about? Torah submission, Torah obedience, Torah observance. That's the work, and doing it in full belief that that's what your king that's coming wants you to be doing. That's going to be in submission to the authority of Yeshua, the Master who's coming. Hopefully that makes some sense. Let's go to chapter 16 and verse 1. Maybe we can finish 1 Corinthians today. We're in chapter 16 and in verse 1. We'll read the first 3 verses. And the verse we're going to focus on is verse 3. Starting in verse 1. "And concerning the collections for the set-apart ones, you are to do as I gave orders to the assemblies in Galatia. On the first day of the week, let each one of you set aside, storing up whatever he has prospered, so that there are no collections when I come. And when I come, whomever you approve by your letters, I shall send to bear your gift to Jerusalem." Okay, so now here we're looking in verse 3. Okay, and he says, first of all, do you understand that? He says on the first day, on Sunday, on the first day, that's when they take up a collection. They're doing business. They're bringing all their stuff together as a collection for Jerusalem. That doesn't mean that they're worshiping on the first day. It just says that on the first day, go and get this stuff together and then give it to somebody and bring it to where I tell you to bring it to. "And when I come, whoever you approve, whomever you have grace, whoever you've approved by your letters, I shall send to bear your gift to Jerusalem." So you have approval there, and also the word gift. He says, "I shall send to bear your gift," or your graciousness, "to Jerusalem." So again, there's no sloppy grace here or doctrine thing here. It has to do with approval and gift. And I quite frankly, I didn't have it in my notes here. I'm pretty sure actually it's the word gift and not approval. That's the word charis or grace. Anybody have the word grace there in their Bibles? In that verse for your gift? We're in verse 3. So I'm pretty sure it's the word gift there. Amen? And so that word gift, again, it certainly has nothing to do with unmerited. It says, look, I gave you instructions to put this offering together, as I instructed the assembly in Galatia, so that we can support the group in Jerusalem. And so you go ahead and bring that gift. Now, we're going to give them a gift. Why? Because we appreciate all that they're doing over there. So it's not an unmerited gift. We're not just randomly sending this stuff to Jerusalem because we just feel like sending it to Jerusalem. But we want to show them that we approve of and support what they're doing. The same reason why a lot of you put money in the box. You know, some of it's your tithe, some of it's an offering because you approve of the work Abba's doing through this ministry. If you didn't, you wouldn't be supporting it. Let's continue in chapter 16 and go down to verse 23. This is our last verse in 1 Corinthians. In chapter 16 and verse 23, Shaul ends the letter by saying, "The favor of our Master Yeshua be with you." So what is he praying? He's saying, the approval of our Master Yeshua be with you. What is he praying? The undeserved favor of our Master be with you. The unmerited favor be with you, because, quite frankly, after all I just said in 1 Corinthians in this letter, just forget all that, because I really don't expect you to do anything. I expect you just to go on doing whatever you want to do and just receive this undeserved favor, because I wasted my breath telling you all this stuff that I think you should be doing and all the stuff I think you shouldn't be doing. Would that make any sense at all? Unmerited favor here. The unmerited favor of Master Yeshua will be with you. No, absolutely not. It makes no sense at all. He says, look, the approval of our Master Yeshua will be with you. That's what he's praying for. I pray that you be approved, that you be found in good standing in the eyes of Messiah. That's what I think he's asking here. It seems to make a whole lot more sense anyway to me, that he would pray this way. So now we've gotten through 1 Corinthians, and I hope we are again noticing the word favor or grace is being used consistently throughout the Tanakh, throughout the book of Acts and the Gospels, Romans, and now 1 Corinthians. It's something that has to do with being approved of, in good standing with, because of what you've done. It's merited. If it's not merited, then it's certainly just graciousness. So it's not unmerited favor or approval. It can just be a graciousness or a gift. And so we have to understand that doesn't make it a new doctrine. What do you hear all the time? It's the doctrine of grace. We're under grace now. We're not under the law. Do you understand now how absurd that sounds? When you understand that being under grace, you can't be under grace unless you are under the law? How are you going to receive approval by not doing the law? You can receive approval just doing lawlessness. And yet people are always on. You can just turn on the TV tomorrow. You'll find at least a dozen guys out there preaching that you're no longer under the law. You're under grace. That's an oxymoron. In other words, it's something that means nothing. It's impossible. You cannot be under grace unless you're under the law, unless you're submissive to the instructions of Yahweh. And now we can take it a step further, that you're under the approval of Yahweh and no longer worried about the penalties of the law, because if you're walking in approval, you know what to do and you're doing it. So you don't have to worry about the penalties of the law because you're not breaking it when you're walking in approval. Of course, if you stop walking in approval, now you got to worry about it, because then you're not walking under grace anymore. So of course now you're going to be under the penalty of the law. So when you're walking under grace, if you're walking under approval, really you're not walking under the law anyway, because the penalty of the law doesn't hurt you, because you're not breaking it. You're walking in submission to, in accordance with the law, in observance of the law, which brings you the approval. So then if people want to use it to talk about penalties and sufferings and punishments of the law, well, yes, if you're under grace, you have no fear of those things. Because to be under grace means that you're already walking it out correctly and you're approved. However, if you start breaking the law, guess what? You're no longer under grace. We talked about the path. And I keep talking about it because it has to be a clear picture for you. That path that you walk on that's covered by the blood, it's like a beautiful canopy over your head. You're covered by the blood of Yeshua. Consider that walking under grace. Because to walk on that path, you have to be Torah observant. Because lawlessness is off to the left or off to the right of that path. That path leads you to the kingdom door. And the whole time you're under grace. Because you're walking it out. That's where your righteousness is walking it out, as you're walking to the point where you're going to need His righteousness when you get to the door. And this picture, just keep bringing it up again and bringing it up again, because it's the key to everything, I think, is understanding this picture. And you step off that road, guess what? You're no longer under the blood, but you're also no longer under grace. There is no grace out there. There's no approval being out there. There's no safety out there off the path. So not only are you not under the covenant, so these are all equivalent terms. Under grace, under covenant, under the commandments, under the Torah, they're all equivalent terms. They mean that you're in approval of the Almighty. And when you're in approval, the blood covers you. When you're in approval, you're walking it out. When you're in approval, you're hearing the words, well done, good and trustworthy servant. When you're in approval, you're under grace. Hopefully this is starting to be clearer and clearer. And here it is. I know you all thought maybe, okay, so the Tanakh doesn't say anything about a doctrine and grace and everything because it's a different word. It's chen, it's not charis. But then we went through the Gospels and, well, Messiah never talked about anything different than we heard in the Tanakh. And then we got into Acts and Romans, and now finally we're dealing with Shaul. And yet even dealing with the Apostle Paul, I'm not seeing any changes here. He's still saying the same thing that we've all been saying, that everybody else previously has been saying. We need to embrace that. We need to be encouraged to understand that. Let's take what we understand now and bring it before the Father. Father, we want to come before you now, and we want to thank you. We want to thank you for your grace. The true grace that is the approval and to be in good standing that we receive from our belief in Messiah Yeshua and our walking in your commandments, so that we can be like those mentioned in Revelation, those having the witness of Messiah and having the commandments. Because that's what brings your approval. And so, Father, we thank you for your approval. We thank you for teaching us what brings your approval, so that we don't just randomly run around just hoping that in some way we're pleasing you. I can't imagine anything more frustrating than running through life not knowing if what I'm doing is pleasing to you. How much more frustrating could life be than just randomly having to guess what might be okay in your sight and make you happy? We are so blessed that you put it in your word, in your book, in the scriptures, so that we know exactly what makes you happy. We know exactly what you approve of and disapprove of. We know exactly what makes you angry. We know exactly what you desire, so that we could do what Shaul said, which is to seek out what is well-pleasing in your sight. And then to diligently seek after it and to actually do the works, so that we build a house on a foundation that can pass the test of the fire. Father, help us to truly embrace the truth about grace, so that we can be approved, so that we can understand what it takes, and so that we can get our lives right during these days of awe between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Right now, where we are walking in those days, Father, where what we're seeking more than anything else is the at-one-ment, the atonement, or the at-one-ment with you, which we know comes when we are walking in approval. Father, help us to take everything into submission and put everything under the test to prove whether it is right in your eyes and not just right in our eyes, so that we can be in good standing with you. Father, we bless you and we thank you, and we appreciate so much that we need not guess, we need not wonder, that it's laid out very clearly in your word what it is you desire of your children. Father, thank you. In Yeshua's name we praise you. It is his authority that we come to you, and we say together, Amen, Amen.